Welcome back to another episode of the SBS Podcast. Today we are taking a look back at UCLA's 27-11 loss to Penn State. We highlight some players emerging on the Bruin roster and new roles on both sides of the football. We're talking the new-look quarterback, new-look offensive line, some breakout studs on defense. Unfortunately, once again, some inexplicable game management mishaps by this first-year coaching staff. Things will be capped off as we preview this week's opponent, the Minnesota Golden Gophers, as they travel to Pasadena to take on the Bruins in this Week 6 Big Ten matchup that is all coming up here on the SBS Podcast. Okay, we're good to go?
Yep.
All right, let's start this one off with some breaking news. It's Tuesday, October 8th, and Jeff Ulbrich is the interim head coach of the New York Jets following the release of Robert Saleh.
Yeah.
I know people have their opinions on Ulbrich after the whole Oregon game meltdown debacle, which is still up on YouTube, by the way. I rewatched that today. And also the timing of his departure to the Falcons, that actually cost UCLA Roquan Smith, which I think some people might forget. I haven't forgotten, but regardless, Ulbrich, he was a linebackers coach for like the golden era of UCLA linebackers in program history. Miles Jack, Kendricks, Barr, Zumwalt.
Yeah, man.
So he's clearly still respected in coaching circles in the NFL. So congrats to Ulbrich.
Yeah, he was the DC of the Jets. Maybe the only bright spot of that Jets team is their defense. So I guess it makes natural sense for him to be the successor, at least in the interim. Congrats to him and all the best. I mean, who's coaching it anyway? Is it even going to be him or is it going to be Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah. I was actually a recruit at the Oregon game.
Yeah?
For track. Yeah. I was on the field for warm-ups, and then I was seated right behind the team. I didn't see the meltdown in real time. I was probably too busy with my head in my hands because we were getting blown out in a top 25 matchup. But anyways, how do we feel about these 9 a.m. kickoffs?
For me, I get the emotional distress out of my day early. So that's a positive.
I'm just a fan at face value.
Yeah.
I think it's a cool change of pace. It kind of forces me to start my Saturday early. Invite some of the boys over. Someone brings the donuts. Someone brings the coffee. My buddy Steve brought some burritos. Had about 5 of us here in the garage. And honestly, despite the result, I actually had a very good time watching the game Saturday. Dude, maybe for Rutgers, that's also announced for 9 a.m., dabble with some mimosas.
Yeah, why not?
I'm kind of all for it. Now, if we were ranked and these were like top 25 matchups and I'm trying to like put together a watch party, that would suck. And I don't know. We'll see if we have more of them if and when we get good again.
Yeah, I mean, I'd prefer, if we're talking about extremes, I'd much rather prefer a 9 a.m. kickoff than an 8 p.m. kickoff.
Facts.
Just in general. But yeah, I mean, for these tough games like the Penn State game, like the LSU game, and then obviously Rutgers coming up, like I said, it gets the misery out of the day early. Like I'm on my couch. I'm still waking up more or less, so I'm I wouldn't say as locked in as I would be as like a 2:30 p.m. kickoff or a 4:30 kickoff.
I feel like the Penn State game is going to be kind of complicated to give thoughts on because I think on one hand there was a lot of good to be taken away from just kind of watching certain players and certain changes that were made in terms of who's playing which positions. And then on the other hand, and this probably sounds pretty familiar to the listeners of the pod at this point, certain decisions being made by the coaching staff that will be pointed out and criticized. But ultimately, despite all the good, the offense only scored 3 meaningful points. And the Bruins lost another one by multiple possessions. They did cover the spread. But let's start with these players, man. We saw a new quarterback in Justin Martin, who was also paired with a brand new center in Sam Yoon. Not brand new. He's a redshirt sophomore, but he was making his first start as well. And then, add the loudest road environment in the Big Ten. And I would say all things considered, you couldn't really ask that much more from your backup quarterback.
Yeah, and Penn State, in my opinion, has the best, if not at least top 3 defense in the country. They have some
statistically they're top 5.
Exactly, and they have some bona fide studs that are for sure going to be playing on Sundays next year. So I think it's just a really, really tough thing to go in as your first college start into one of the most difficult road environments to go in, and against a very, very strong defense. just in general, no matter what the performance is, just taking that first snap, it has to be a very difficult mental thing for Justin to go through, and I think he deserves some credit after that performance.
Yeah, Martin goes 22 for 30, 167 passing yards, and 1 touchdown, although there's no question that the biggest stat line there, or lack thereof, 0 interceptions.
Yeah, man. I mean, there was a couple times where we got to the, he was kind of scrambling, and we'll touch on his scrambling efforts and his pocket presence later, but I was like, oh, here comes an interception. Here comes an interception. He's just gonna try to make a play where he's gonna try to squeeze a ball in a tight window, and you're not that guy. But then he just kind of scrambles and gets out of bounds at the line of scrimmage, or even takes a sack maybe. I think we only took 2 sacks.
Took 2 sacks, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We're gonna talk about the offensive line, but the offensive line played relatively well. Those 2 sacks were, I don't want to throw one guy under the bus, but were directly because of TJ Harden whiffing on his blitz assignment. So yeah, only took 2 sacks. The 2 sacks that he did take, like you mentioned, a lot of situations with the first-time starter, you'll see those turn into panic passes and interceptions or fumbles. But they didn't. One of them was actually a fumble, but he recovered at the 1-yard line. But I think I'll take it a step further and say the best thing that I saw in Martin's game against Penn State isn't even something that you can really find on the stat sheet. It was just more so of his decisiveness if you watch the game. We talked last week on the show that the ball needs to come out quicker. And I think that we certainly saw that. He knew he liked the targets he had in Loya, Mataval, the tight ends, the running backs, sort of those like quarterback best friend type receivers. And had some good velocity on those balls. I think a little bit more often than you'd like. A lot of those balls came off of like his back foot.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, some of the best passes of the game came off of those types of throws. That wheel route that he had, which I think was his longest attempt. There was like a 15-yard, maybe 17-yard attempt at TJ on that wheel route. Came off his back foot and was an absolute dime. Great touch. I'm surprised TJ caught it because it was a little out front, but nevertheless, given the pressure, great pass. And while I certainly still have plenty of criticism about Eric Bieniemy's offense, I'll give him some credit in that I think he did a good job of, like we mentioned, involving those quarterback-friendly type receivers with the slot receivers, the tight ends, the running backs. It kind of made Martin's decisions for him. You could tell his progressions. He knew exactly where the first read was, and the ball was coming out quick. 2-3-step drops out of the shotgun is really all we saw. We were looking to see more of that. None of these 5-step drops, slow developing passing plays. And like I mentioned, I don't recall there being a passing attempt of 15-plus yards.
Yeah, there was no deep balls that I can think of off the top of my head. But we talked about it last week where we said that Eric Bieniemy needs to pick a certain amount of plays where Justin is confident that he's going to make those passes, whether it's to Mataval, or TJ Harden, whoever, or even Loya, that he knows he's going to get it. Like we said, the safety blanket plays. And I think Bieniemy was a little more confident in calling those plays than he did with Garbers, maybe because it's in a more inexperienced quarterback. But we saw a lot of those early on, and I think his first quarter, we were texting and fairly surprised with the product we saw on the field.
Yeah. We mentioned when previewing the Penn State game last episode that, I mentioned that all I wanted to see was some change that showed that the coaching staff could come together and sort of reflect and realize that what they were doing wasn't working. Now, granted, they only put up 3 meaningful points in this entire game, so I don't want to crown them really for anything. But given it wasn't a complete disaster with turnovers and leading to a massive blowout with the first-time starting quarterback on the road, I think the play calling made sense at least. So I'll give them that. We mentioned Sam Yoon getting his first start at center. That was just one piece of a total overhaul of the offensive line. You still have Holstege at left guard, but at left tackle now you've got Nicky Prongos, who's a former walk-on recently put on scholarship. I thought he played a serviceable game. At center, we mentioned you've got Sam Yoon making his first start. He's a redshirt sophomore, and that was able to free up Josh Carlin, who was able to move back to his natural position that he's played his whole career at UCLA at right guard. And then you've got, of course, Garrett DiGiorgio at right tackle. I don't think that this unit is going to be like leading any leaderboards, but what I will say is that it looked like there was just a better sense of order and organization with this lineup. Unije was not getting it done at left tackle. I don't know if he was playing injured. It sounds like he might be out for the remainder of the season. Either way, it felt like guys were out of position. Josh Carlin was not playing up to his standards at center. So with this unit, I think you've got guys playing in positions that they've played their entire careers, and it just makes a lot more sense, man, because if you go back to that Hawaii game, it looked like Pop Warner.
Yeah, and, if we strictly want to go based off the eye test, this game started off way better than I expected. The defense got a 3-and-out, and we'll get to the defense later, but more importantly, when we're talking about those decisions, the first drive UCLA had with the ball was 11 plays, 46 yards, 6 minutes, 21 seconds of clock time. They went for it on a 4th and 1. They didn't get it, but the decision-making was better.
Yep.
And you see that, and sure, we go all the way down the field. We don't get any points. We're still 0-0 with Penn State after about 8 minutes of clock have run off the first quarter. And that's not the worst place to be.
Yeah. No, we talked about kind of being able to stay ahead of the sticks and follow a script in your opening drive. And I think that you saw that up until the second 4th down attempt. There's a lot of Logan Loya in those first few sets of downs, which I think was great. I think we haven't seen enough of him through the first 4 games up until that point, so it was great to see him involved on that opening drive. Like you mentioned, I love the quick, no-brainer decision to go for that first 4th down. I think they're on the Penn State 40.
Yep.
And then, God, man, I don't know if you rewatched that second 4th down attempt where they ran, I think it was a zone play to TJ.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a hole that he missed, and had he hit it, it was a touchdown. He cut it back into the one hole where there were 2 linebackers. And it's easy to sort of criticize him, but I rewatched the game, and Sam Yoon, the center, people underestimate the impact that a center has on the offensive line. He's the anchor there. And oftentimes, centers will not be tasked with a one-on-one engagement against the defensive line, and therefore their job is to work their way up into the second level of the defense. On that specific zone play, Sam Yoon did not have a one-on-one, and he sort of took his time to move up into the second level of the D to go get the linebackers. And by him just kind of standing there blocking nobody, when you saw it, that camera angle, that replay from TJ's perspective, it didn't look like a hole because Yoon was just standing there. He's got to move up quicker to show TJ, hey, there's a hole here, and move up to that second level because from his perspective, it looked like it was full. So he cut it back to the right and ran straight into the linebackers. I mean, it could have, should have, would have. I don't know if that's a coaching thing, but the hole was there, and it would have been a touchdown. So that was a tough way for that drive to end because, like you mentioned, man, it was looking promising to open up out of the gate.
Yeah, and you almost kind of heard kind of a silence falling over Beaver Stadium in Happy Valley, and I was like, oh, shit. This is I didn't expect it, to say the least. And then, finding Matavao on that first 4th down go, I think it was a gain of 9 yards.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of harkens back to a little bit of DTR. He loves his tight ends.
Yep.
Those crossing routes over the middle for about a 10-yard gain. It's kind of go back to some things that work.
Yep.
Justin Martin, was he ever in the program with DTR, maybe 1 year?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
He this is his 3rd year with the program.
So he would have been 1 year overlap.
1 year with DTR. And it's funny you bring up the tight ends because I believe since 2023, although there's obviously overlap with Chip's offense, who we all know loved his tight ends, UCLA is the number 1 Big Ten. UCLA ranks at the top of the Big Ten for yards per completion to tight end. It's a bit of a niche statistic, but it goes to show that UCLA continues to use the tight end, and I think that's a good thing. Do you want to switch over to defense?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
All right. I think overall this was probably the defense's best outing of the season. Anyone that watched this game knows that they only really gave up 24 legitimate points because the field goal that Penn State got after that complete phantom holding call on Brian Addison, I mean, I thought we left that behind in the Pac-12. That was horrible.
Yeah, and then the chance for that makeup call, just a few.
No, and they missed it on Jalen Berger.
Exactly.
Oh, sure.
It was unbelievable to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a really tough one to swallow, but hats off to the defense for showing some mental fortitude, after having to have an interception in a critical point of the game when you're just dying to get the offense back out there and score a touchdown. They have to walk back out there, and they don't surrender a touchdown, and they only give up a field goal. So hats off to that. I thought overall defense forced multiple punts, tightened up on some drives like I literally just mentioned to force Penn State to settle for some field goals. And really credit to Ikeka Malloy for some personnel changes he made, specifically Femi Oladejo now at edge rush and putting Carson Schweissinger at linebacker. I thought both turned out to be very beneficial for the D.
Yeah, I mean, they forced a pretty good Penn State offense. I mean, we talked about Drew Aller last week. 2 punts on their opening first 2 offensive drives.
Yeah.
It's nothing to sneeze at, and doing it well. Obviously, defense is a position group that you get tired the more you're on the field, the more. And I think Penn State, they were the number 7 team at the time. I think they were up to number 5 now with all the craziness that happened last week in college football. But they hung in there, and I felt okay giving up 27, and like you said, one touchdown's probably a BS touchdown.
Field goal.
Yeah, it should be a field goal. So realistically, 20. What does that make it? 24 points.
It should have been 24. They got a field goal out of that call, and
exactly.
it should have been a turnover. But no, I completely agree. I really want to talk about the emergence of Oladejo.
Yeah.
And Schweissinger, we've known for at least a little while to be a solid tackler. We'll get to him in a moment. But Femi, 10 total tackles, 5 solo, and UCLA's first sack since Hawaii.
Wow.
And that is his best game as a Bruin by far. I don't know if he has a game that was statistically better than that. Even if there is, this was his coming out party, and it kind of reminded me of Anthony Barr's first game as a linebacker after being switched over from running back against Rice. Now, I'm not saying that was anywhere near the level of impact that Barr had back in that game, but a big improvement nevertheless. I think it's also nice to get someone who looks the way Femi Oladejo looks to start making some plays and getting some screen time on the broadcast, because the dude looks like Ray Lewis. So to get someone that looks like Femi to actually start making some plays, it's just great.
And if we kind of get a stars aligning game where Oladejo and maybe Kane Medrano can have good games together, I think the defense has a real chance to put us into some games that maybe were a little bit of a stretch to win, and can really buy some time and buy some possessions for the offense.
Yeah, that's a great point, because despite Femi playing a good game, UCLA still struggles to apply pressure. The blitzes were still pretty ineffective. They didn't blitz much in the first place, but I'm glad you brought up Medrano, because Medrano did make a couple of plays. He had that tipped pass and a couple of tackles. He played one snap seemingly out of the cornerback position, and he had a good pass breakup. But outside of that, he wasn't really having the impact that he's had in the past few games. So if Malloy can find a way to kind of have a sort of a dynamic pass rushing approach with both Kane Medrano and Femi Oladejo, that might actually be a new unlocked approach that he's got with these two pass rushers. But we mentioned Carson Schweissinger. He's on scholarship now, right?
Yeah.
I have to assume.
Yeah.
He has to be.
Has to be.
That's a recent thing.
I mean, he's been on the top of the stat sheets for defense, I think, the entire season.
Yeah. I think he's got 49 total tackles now for the season. He had 15 total tackles, 6 of them solo against Penn State. Really just effective at getting to the football and sniffing out the ball carrier.
Yeah, and it's about getting these players involved when you need to against these high-powered offenses, which we're at the tail end of this gauntlet, and we'll come up against good offenses in the next few games that we have, but nothing compared to what we've seen, especially on the offensive line. If we could get Schweissinger to really hone in on that ball hawk sort of mentality on these run plays, I think it could unlock a new level for the UCLA defense that's seen struggles for the past few games, especially when the ball is out of the quarterback's hands.
Sure.
I was going to say, I just want to bring some attention to the secondary. I know we're kind of pretty high on this line up front and the linebackers, but this secondary is something that Malloy and the entire coaching staff on that defensive side needs to show some attention to. I felt anytime the ball left Drew Aller's hands and it was a completion, our secondary was missing tackles
and just large cushions.
Yeah.
Penn State, they didn't have too many of them, but a handful of large completions, and it was just Aller having plenty of time in the pocket. and being able to find gaps in these zone coverages. I don't know if we have guys that struggle in man coverage. I really haven't been watching intently enough in regards to that, but schematically something I think can be tried. Like something new can be tried there, because it's just it felt so soft. It felt like these guys are running uncontested 5-7 yard dig or curl routes, and Aller would just drop back, dink and dunk, and it was just way too easy. Since I kind of feel the conversation swaying negative, I'm going to go head first.
Sure.
I'm going head first. Before we switch gears to Minnesota, I want to talk about some coaching decisions, which at this point, man, I feel like should almost become a segment on this show. What new way did Foster find to surrender this game away? And it's getting more and more frustrating to talk about this, but it needs to be addressed. You go back to the end of that first half. The score is 14-3.
Yep.
Not a disaster, especially when you're receiving to start the second half. And Penn State scores its second touchdown, and UCLA receives the ball with 20 seconds remaining. Now, look, I understand calling a run on that first play, even though you have a timeout, because, look, the odds of you passing your way into scoring position from the 20, 25, wherever we were, with 20 seconds remaining, the odds aren't good enough to take the risk of maybe a pick six and take it into the half. But UCLA runs the ball with TJ Harden and goes for like 15, 16 yards.
Yep.
And advances to the UCLA 40-yard line.
Yep.
13 seconds now remain with the clock stopped to move the chains, and UCLA sitting on a timeout. UCLA sits on the timeout and takes it to the half, despite being at the 40 with 13 seconds left and a timeout. I mean, there's
zero reason.
No, there isn't. I mean, dude, you're telling me that you don't want to at least try to use that timeout, use those 13 seconds to maybe gain 20 yards to make it a 57-yard field. Pagani hit a 54-yarder this season.
Yep.
You've got a kicker, and you're not like you're a 30-point underdog. You're 1-3. You're at risk of going 1-4. You're a meme because of this press conference. Everybody's ranking UCLA 18th out of 18 Big Ten teams, and you're just going to settle for a 14-3. Because are you afraid of your quarterback throwing a pick six? Are you playing scared? I don't understand how, given where UCLA is and given the criticism that's been thrown at Deshaun Foster, how he's not just looking for an opportunity to score points and to play winning football.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, like you said, 14-3. When was the last time they had scored an offensive touchdown? Probably like 8 quarters, something like that at that point, maybe. What do you have to lose? Absolutely nothing. You're going to shake the confidence of your new starting quarterback, who isn't, I guess, the starting quarterback.
That's assuming the worst if he throws a pick, but whatever, man. Like, I'm not saying you got to gain 50 yards. You got to get in a field goal range, and you're at the 40, and you have time for at least a couple of plays.
Yeah, and you have plays that work. We talked about it earlier in that opening drive that you felt, we're moving offensively.
The offense had looked good in the first half, and you were using guys like Loya that can find holes in zones and maybe get guys open along the sideline, maybe incorporate some of the wideouts. I don't know, but you're the head coach. It's your job to have a situational football that you've practiced in those exact types of situations. It's not unreasonable to think that UCLA could have had a chance at making that a one-score game going into the half while receiving the ball to start the second half. It's an entirely different halftime.
And it's kind of like we talked about with that first drive of going for it on fourth, and it's okay you didn't get it.
Yeah.
That's what it is here.
No one's faulting you for that.
Just go, right? You trust your quarterback. Trust your receivers. Run another run play, maybe to set up a field goal. But do something that shows some will to win.
Yeah.
You're satisfied with being down 14-3 at half.
Yeah,
it's not winning football.
I mean, Joel Klatt on the broadcast couldn't believe it, and that isn't even the most egregious example. UCLA gets the ball with 8 minutes to go, down 3 possessions, and they take basically the entirety of that time. They take 8 minutes running the ball, exhausting the play clock, taking their time to score a garbage time touchdown, whereas at the beginning of that drive, dude, there was still a chance to play competitive football and to try and get back in it. Is it likely? Obviously not. But UCLA is almost kind of built like a reputation in the college football lore of the last 10 years of improbable comebacks. Josh Rosen was on the sideline.
Yep.
I mean, we've seen it in this program. He's been involved in games like that. They're only down 3 possessions with 8 minutes to go. Like, what the fuck do you have to lose to where you're instead thinking, no, we're going to just march down the field, use up the entirety of the play clock, and score a touchdown with 30 seconds to go.
And maybe score a touchdown. But like there was parts of that drive where I wasn't even sure we were going to score a touchdown. I was like, okay, we're going to get to the 20-yard line, and we're not going to get there. It's going to be a 4th and 7, and he's going to trot Bogani out to make it 27-6.
Well, it felt very self-serving for Foster, because I think that the noise is really getting to him, and I'll be honest, he's a lot more thin-skinned than I thought he would be, and I'll just say that he went on that sort of blocking crusade on Twitter, blocked a lot of UCLA fan accounts, a lot of UCLA fans. A lot of them seemingly didn't really recall ever tweeting at him, so it looked like he was searching his name on Twitter. So that was already a bit of a red flag. And going back to this being kind of self-serving, dude, I think it's now 10 quarters since UCLA scored a touchdown. He wants to ensure that the score looks better than it actually was, and to be able to say that, hey, we scored a touchdown here. So it was sort of a score a touchdown at all costs type approach, whereas it should have been, we have to try to win at all costs. I mean, it goes against your duties as head coach to put your team in a position to win the game at any point in the game. You don't just get to quit, and you don't just get to intentionally manipulate a drive to play as safely as possible. Dude, they were taking advantage of Penn State's defense that was playing soft coverage because they're anticipating the pass.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was fucking unbelievable.
It was a little selfish.
Yeah.
I think that's the word for it, right?
You don't think the team wants to go out and maybe trying to get back in this? I mean, they were playing them way harder than they probably had anticipated coming into the game, and it was improbable that they scored those 3 possessions, but at least go out there and try.
Exactly. If you're not going to – see, because it was such a in-between move. You're not surrender punting because you went for it on 4th down earlier in the drive. You're not giving up, but you're also not going for it.
I think
what are you doing?
I think running the ball the first 2 plays of that drive and using up play clock was worse than a surrender punt, in my opinion. I think it was as bad, if not worse.
Yeah, but I mean, you've gone for it on 4th down already.
Yeah.
So then why are we going to continue to go for it if we're not actually giving a shit?
Yeah.
With the play calling, I think the players give a shit. I think that's not who I'm faulting whatsoever. And then I mean, it kind of continues through the post game a little bit. But yeah, man, I'm a bit of a loss for words with that last drive. I mean, you give me that drive, I don't know, sometime in the 3rd quarter. When
sure,
I'll take it. But have some situational awareness.
But that's assuming that Penn State isn't playing the coverages that they exploited garbage time football to score a meaningless touchdown to save face in the final score, and to say that we have scored a touchdown since the first half against LSU. It was self-serving bullshit, and UCLA fans should be pissed. And I hope he's held accountable through the media, because I'm tired of talking about this. I'm tired of the head coach quitting. If UCLA is going to take a gamble on a first-time head coach, it's got to be a guy that's hungry to prove himself and to go out there and win, not to try and save face. It's aggravating.
Yeah, and it's almost we've brought it up a couple times in terms of the comparison to Curt Cignetti of Indiana. Now, Cignetti isn't a first-time coach, but he's moving over from a small program and having an big FBS Power 5 program for the first time. They were up against Northwestern in their game, and he continued, and they had the ball, and they could have ran out the clock. But he continued to put pressure on Indiana, and then obviously forced a turnover at the He continued to put pressure on Northwestern and then scored another touchdown to secure the game, secure the victory. That's winning football.
Yeah.
It's not winning by 3 points and, we have a 3-point lead, or we're down by, however many. It's you go to win the game until the fat lady sings.
Dan Lanning went for 2 against UCLA at the Rose Bowl, up 3-ish possessions.
Yeah.
I mean, he's accounting for everything there. What if UCLA starts scoring or we start turning the ball over? You continue to play until the game is over. Until it's mathematically impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It was not UCLA was not mathematically out of the game. I've seen them do, like I mentioned, Deshaun Foster's been a part of teams that have come back from way more.
The Washington State game.
Washington State, and he was on the staff for Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm. So
I don't want to hear it. And if this continues to happen throughout the remainder of the season, now that these are more winnable games, then I'm officially off the train. I mean, I already have my frustrations, as do a lot of UCLA fans. I'm frustrated that Martin Jarman has not. I don't think we've heard from him since UCLA's since maybe the last win.
Yeah,
it's just kind of Foster taking the stand at in these post-practice interviews, post-game interviews, and we don't hear from Martin Jarman, his guy that he's gambling on. And there's decisions being made that you would almost sometimes expect from this kind of gamble of a hire. Yet Jarman's just radio silence. So the whole situation's frustrating.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up the question to you, Ross, and we could cut this if we want to, but is he almost a fall guy?
Foster?
Yeah.
In what sense?
In the sense of, hey, we need to have a bad year. We can't have UCLA football can't have a good year. And this is coming. I'm not saying this is Foster wants to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I think. You see this debate raging on the forum, the UCLA forums, UCLA Twitter, where, was he put in a position to fail? Was he never going to be successful? How much of it is his fault? How much of it is Martin's fault? All of these conversations are coming up. I think that, Foster was never going to work with him.
No, and I don't think that he is a fall guy because UCLA was not forced to make this hire. There were other candidates available, even at the
late point,
even in the late period in which UCLA was dealt with finding a new head coach after Chip Kelly left. Martin Jarman was not forced to make this hire. So for us to call him a fall guy, I don't think would be fair because this was his decision. This was Martin Jarman's conscious decision to hire this person. There were other candidates that people that Bruin fans online really wanted, that I personally wanted, and this is the decision that he made. And I think because of that, you would expect more communication, more transparency from him. But instead, we're seeing the same story where when things go south, we don't hear from that guy. And it's wearing thin on me. It's wearing thin on a lot of UCLA fans. And I think UCLA fans have every right to be extremely frustrated. I know we try to, we're pointing out good things that we found in the game, and those things should be acknowledged, but the situation that UCLA football fans find themselves sitting through, it's so self-inflicted and so frustrating. So when you see these types of debacles going into the half or to close out the drive, it's just like, fuck this, dude. So
yeah, it's exhausting. It's exhausting, and we see fans like ourselves, you especially, Ross. These are the backbone. These fans are the backbone of your program, of your institution. I love Ted Lasso. There's a great, scene in one of the seasons there where all the owners, and this is pro, are trying to take the game away from the game is nothing without the fans.
Yep.
It's nothing. You have no product. You have nothing to sell. You have absolutely zilch without the fans. And to almost turn around, you're turning your back on this group that has been steadfast with you through decades, through everything, and making decisions that anybody could tell you is going to fail.
Yep.
It's not even like, oh, hey, we took a risk, and at least we're going all in on it. They're not even all in on this risk, which is the crazy thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, the most saddening, exhausting, call it whatever word you want to, of this whole situation. And it gets to the point where you're just like, are we going to what has to happen at this point?
Yeah.
What else do you need to see to for something to flip in your mind that, hey, we actually need to do some dramatic changes in the program or the department?
I completely hear you, man. I'm at my wit's end with it. That doesn't mean I'm going to not watch the remainder of this season. I want to continue to talk weekly about UCLA football, and I'm surely going to continue doing that. But sometimes you just kind of have to air it out because, I'm a fan first and foremost, and it's been decades of mind-blowing decision-making, of bad football, with small glimmers here and there. So when things like this happen, I've got a bit of a short fuse, and it's very frustrating.
Valid.
But we're looking ahead. We've got Minnesota coming to the Rose Bowl to play the Bruins. Another 6 p.m. kickoff. I think UCLA has gotten relatively. I know the 8 p.m. kickoff people didn't really like. But no noon kickoff so far. I kind of like the 6 p.m. kickoff against the Golden Gophers. They're coming to town. They are a 5.5-point favorite. Minnesota coming off a massive win at home against SC. That was fantastic to see those guys go down. But now they're our opponent this week.
And it's interesting because Minnesota's head coach, PJ Fleck, who we were speaking about earlier about the coaching candidates, he was a name that was thrown around there. Whether he threw his own name in the hat or it was an actual candidate, that's neither here nor there at this point. But he was someone who wanted to come to UCLA, and I think he's going to come in with a chip on his shoulder.
Sure.
That he wasn't given this opportunity. Listen, they're not a good football team. They have one really impressive win on their record, and that's the USC win. Obviously, they got killed by Iowa. They lost in a close one to Michigan, but they were being blown out by like 20-something points at some point in that game. And they blew out a Rhode Island team that nobody cares about. But they have a first-year FBS quarterback in Max Brosmer, who's not particularly strong, which I think is going to be good for us. But when it mattered, he did make some big passes against USC. He didn't have any touchdowns, I don't think. At least not on this this stat sheet that I'm looking at. But
I think that this could be a game that we'll actually see for the first time UCLA's defense get a chance to truly keep them in the game. I know Minnesota's a pretty solid rushing team, but that feeds pretty well into UCLA's kind of one clear strength this year, and that's the ability to defend against the run. I thought they did that pretty well against Penn State. I'm giving up hope that the run game is going to be established. I think the bigger question is who's going to be starting at quarterback. Obviously, the big question is who is going to be the starting quarterback for UCLA. Is it going to be Justin Martin? Is it going to be Ethan Garbers? And honestly, I hear both sides here. I know that recency bias would have one saying, you know what? We've seen enough from Garbers. He's a fifth-year senior, and the first few games it just wasn't clicking. And it looked like Martin was serviceable enough against Penn State to why would we not give him another shot? But, I mean, that's a decision for the coaches to be made.
Yeah, and this is my question to you, Ross. Do you think that decision has been made? We're recording on Tuesday.
Yeah, it hasn't been shared with us. Deshaun's been very vague about who he intends to start. Immediately following the game in the post-game presser, he said if Garbers is healthy, he's the guy, which I thought was very reckless and silly to say. I think you should go back and rewatch the game and then get your staff together to make the best decision possible, but instead we're just crowning him the starter if he's healthy. So I didn't fully understand that. If that's just a blind loyalty thing, I strongly disagree with that. But that's not to say that I think that UCLA should walk away from Garbers because, like I mentioned, man, Martin looked good, but his passes were pretty limited to some checkdowns. While those are great, we never once attempted to throw the ball down the field. He's been with the program for a minute now, and his name wasn't really discussed in these preseason starting quarterback discussions. So I don't want to take too much away from the Penn State game and say, hey, give him the keys, even if Garbers is healthy. It'll be an interesting decision.
Yeah, and I think that the way that Minnesota is handling this, PJ Fleck said that they're not sure which quarterback's going to play, but they're preparing for both of them.
Yeah.
And obviously, as we know, each quarterback, Martin and Garbers, provide different things as a passer and behind center. So PJ Fleck is showing a lot of respect to the Bruins with what he's been saying in his pressers because for them, they're coming off a big win. This is a winnable game for them on a schedule that doesn't have a ton of winnable games. They are also one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. So I think that they're going to be teetering on that bowl game line. So they're coming in. They need to win. This is a must-win game for them as much as it is for us. So I think they're going to be ready to come out and show, the Rose Bowl and show, the Big Ten that the UCLA isn't ready. That one of the former or current bottom feeders of the conference, can handle them.
Yeah. But all that aside, this is I know it's kind of silly to say at 1-4 and people's opinions of this team at this point is very low, but this is a very important game for this UCLA football team. I mean, this is about where we expected the team to be, give or take one loss. The gauntlet happened, and the 3 losses happened as we expected. But this game was circled at the end of that tunnel as a home game against a beatable opponent. Now, you go out there and you fail to live up to that opportunity to get back on track and win a game. Now you're at risk if you're the coaching staff. Are we going to lose this team's will to really go into a week of practice and think that they have a shot at any game for the rest of the season? Do you lose the locker room if you fail to win this game? So this one's very important. I think the quarterback they elect to go with is going to be very important in capitalizing on being at home against a beatable opponent. They've got to be up for it because it's an absolute must-win. I think that goes completely without saying.
Totally. And you mentioned the gauntlet of 3 games. Which we said at the beginning of the season. Looking back on it right now, I think it's a gauntlet of 4 games. Indiana is a good football team. They are the first college football team to be bowl eligible. Like we said last week, there is a chance that they could be undefeated going into Columbus, and you can even see them in the Big Ten championship game. So we lost 4 games.
Yeah,
we lost them bad. We didn't play well, but if you turn around on the other side of that and you're like, hey, we kind of expected to lose those 4 games. And we come back with a win, this could change the outlook of a lot of people and hopefully build some hope and pride that this season isn't just a 1-11 season.
Well, I think also through that gauntlet, UCLA learned a lot about themselves. I think they found some new things. Like we spent the first half of this episode discussing the changes that were made by Malloy on defense personnel-wise, as well as the changes and kind of the establishment of the offensive line as it stands today. I think it'll be interesting to see if this is sort of a revived team on the other side of that 3-game stretch with some personnel changes, some new units that are coming out onto the field, and see if they can turn this around, because we've been talking about how the remainder of this schedule, this is the back end of the schedule where there's a lot of winnable games. And aside from really who is like
Rutgers, USC?
Rutgers and USC. And those two are beatable. And they're absolutely beatable. So very interesting game this Saturday. Excited to see how it plays out. As Deshaun loves to say, we're just excited. All right, let's switch gears to Gettin Parlayed. What is the let's get an update on
Yeah,
on the
we still
record.
haven't won. What is it, 0-5 now?
Seriously?
Yeah, I my pick, you got yours right last week. That was mine. Who didn't cover... Who did I even pick last week? Whatever.
Well,
yeah, it was bad, but you picked Washington to cover or beat Michigan, and
I
they
know.
did.
I wasn't going to be the one to bring it up. I was kind of waiting for you to bring it up.
Yeah, there it is.
But you know what they say, when we're winless, that means we're due.
Hell yeah.
Keon, as always, kick us off.
Okay, so I am going to pick maybe the game of the day. Ohio State traveling to Eugene along with game day. Ohio State is a 3.5-point favorite, and I am going to take the Buckeyes. I don't think Oregon is that great of a team. I think Ohio State is the best team in the Big Ten. I think Ohio State should be the number 2 team in the country if they're not. And I think they'll easily cover over a field goal with Oregon up there.
Yep. Nobody wants to say it because everybody's so excited about that game, but that has the makings to be the biggest disappointment of the day. In terms of these big, high-profile matchups, I think Ohio State...
In terms of it being like a close game.
I think Ohio State might actually put it to them. I like that pick, and on a much lower profile, I'm taking Pitt 2.5 favorites against Cal. I say Pitt covers there. Pitt is undefeated. They are number 22 in the country, and they're playing at home against a Cal team that's coming off a heartbreaking loss against Miami. That was beautiful to see because, as always... Fuck Cal.
Yep.
So give me Pitt there, and
all right.
And once again, it's just 2 picks because we are missing our friend Kyle. But hopefully next week, the 3 of us will be back for a full panel of the SBS podcast. But as always, thanks again, guys, for tuning in. We greatly appreciate your support and continue to spread the word about the SBS pod. And we'll come at you next week to recap this Minnesota game and preview the following week's opponents, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. But thanks again, guys. That's all we got. Go Bruins.
Go Bruins.